Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. We are honored today to have once again El Señor Arturo Dominguez, who is the author of, I think it's Latin Rebels. What's the name of your rag?
Oh, I'm Antagonist Mag, the Antagonist magazine at antagonistmag.com.
Okay, the Antagonist magazine.com, but there's a whole lot more that you do because you're also with, and I'm going to have that in the lead up to this thing, all the places that you're actually blogging and writing at. You're one of our preeminent writers out here. But anyhow, one of the reasons we're talking, Arturo, is that at one of our writers organizations, Woke, we were discussing an issue with John Leguizamo, who had something to say. Why don't you tell us that story and we'll move on from there?
Well, I'll try to sum it up without butchering it. Essentially, he made a comment during an interview where he had said that he avoided the sun to maintain a more white appearance so that he's, I guess, more appealing to directors and casters and stuff like that. And there's a lot of things to take away from that, I think, because I understand where he's coming from.
Let me stop you there, because you as being a Latino who can pass, I was actually surprised as well, your reaction, right? Because whereas this group that we were discussing, this group of writers, I was a predominantly African-American type group. Mm-hmm. And whereas most of the people in that group looked at it like, oh, great thing that he did. They actually were very forgiving. You actually got pretty darn upset. Explain.
Well, my being upset, I was a little disappointed because to me, it runs a little contradictory to everything he stood for. So in a sense, he's had clout for a while. Okay. And I think that maybe he should have called it out sooner, but he also participated in perpetuating that whiteness type of thing. Light skin is better. You hear it in the Black community too, about colorism in Hollywood, stuff like that. It's a big problem across the board. And in a sense, like, I'm a huge John Leguizamo fan. Personal favorites of mine are all his one-man shows. They're like really good, really well thought out. And he's a great talent. But and one of the reasons I'm trying to get in touch with him is because I want to try to see how I can navigate this area, being a huge fan of his and a supporter of all his advocacy. And like, he understands racism. He understands colorism. He knows it better than most people do. And to me, I felt like that comment, and then, a tweet that he put it out in 2020 after a bunch of Black actors won some awards and stuff. He's talking about, why can't Latinx get a piece of the pie? The timing of that. A lot of people accused him of anti-Blackness.
Oh, wait a minute. I hadn't known about that one. What was that one about?
Well, I put it in an article because I wanted to point to how he's been accused of anti-Blackness before. And it's not that he's anti-Black, but I feel like he has a pretty glaring blind spot where, Black people are in the process of celebrating all these Black celebrities receiving awards, Emmys and stuff. And in that process, he, drops a tweet, saying, when can Latinx get a piece of the pie? And
I see what in other words, he wasn't being anti-Black. He was saying, hell, look at what's happening with this other minority group. Why can't it happen to ours as well?
Right. His perspective was that, but he used a clip, or he used a screenshot of the Washington Post article that said something about, Black artists, winning all these awards. So a lot of people took that timing as, basically trying to steal Black people's joy in a sense. And if you're doing that, that's anti-Black. But I don't believe that's what his intent was. And I think over time, a couple of days pass, people realize that that's not what his intent was. However, it points to the blind spot situation that I was talking about. And this is one of the reasons why I'd love to have the conversation with him, because there's very few people out there that can go as in depth as he can. And how I like to do things, Egberto. I'm very analytical. I get deep in things, and I like to talk about the stuff nobody wants to talk about, because that's the only way you're going to achieve change.
Well, let me tell you how deep this man is. This man is in leadership position in a mostly, I was going to say black, but it's a mostly African American women-led organization.
Right,
That's
right.
the kind of clout this man has with because the women out there, they love you, man. If you hear Allison and all those folks talk about you, they just think you're the best thing since apple pie.
That's awesome. You know, and I appreciate that. You know, I don't, you know, I don't, you know, a lot of people would use that, like, hey, look, you know, I'm accepted here, I'm accepted there. But you know, it's not about any of that. Like, I came into the Writers and Editors of Color Collective. I was one of the first 5 or 10 people. You know, Allison invited me after she read my White Latinos Don't Exist, Wannabes Do article.
No, that
And
article was a bad article, man.
oh
That one
man,
just that was a bad article. Yeah.
yeah, and you know, while my thoughts may have changed a little bit on that, they're still pretty much the same. You know, there's not very, you know, I'm just more careful about how I address things. But aside from that, you know, I joined the collective early on, and they were a huge supporter of my work on Medium and outside of Medium. And you know, I started supporting their work, and I made a commitment at the beginning of 2020 to elevate more Black writers. And it just so happened that summer was the racial reckoning, you know, all that stuff with the Black Lives Matter protests. And I found myself in a position where I'm promoting a lot of Black writers, and I'm communicating with Black writers and becoming part of conversations with Black writers while not injecting myself, you know. And I think that if more people did that, you know, like, what was the phrase, you know, if you stop, just shut up so you can listen. If you're talking, you're not listening, right?
Right.
I think if more people took that approach, we could get a lot further. And you know, for us, for like Latinos and stuff, I think that the true freedom for us can't happen until, you know, we achieve Black liberation for Black people in this country, you know. And that, you know, you're talking about you know, economic justice, racial, I mean, maybe, you know, even reparations, you know, you talk about racial justice, police reform, things like that. Because everything they ever use against Black people inevitably gets used against us, right? Against Latinos. We saw them do it to Indigenous people. We saw them do it to the Chinese with the Chinese Exclusion Act. You know, things like every white supremacist tool that was used against Black people inevitably gets turned and used against someone else. So if we don't address the anti-Blackness behind how capitalist society in the United States is built, then we can't get forward either. You know, that's the biggest hurdle and the biggest roadblock. If you can break down the anti-Blackness in this country, then it opens the door for everybody. You know, the Civil Rights Act proved that. You know, when Black people stood up and got the Civil Rights Act, you know, they had the support of the Jewish community, a lot of like the farm workers and things like that. But once, you know, Black people achieved the Civil Rights Act, who got freedoms from that? The LGBTQ community, Latinos did, you know, marriage equality, all that stuff. So, you know, with whatever the Black community has done, it's benefited everybody else.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's one of the communities that have struggled the most. Now, Arturo, we're coming close to the end of our conversation here. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the last few? I mean, I must admit, I hadn't read the last few articles. I get the emails in, but my bag have been so full, but the titles have been intriguing. Tell us a synopsis of your last few articles, and I'm going to post them along with our blog.
Well, I did one on Medium that I think is relatively important. It's, you know, the deep state is usurping democracy. I talk about how, you know, right-wing, far-right people in government, at DHS, politicians in Congress, you know, what the right likes to say is the deep state. That's their deep state, and they're, you know, actively trying to overthrow our democracy. The other thing, another issue that I've been trying to tackle is the misinformation on Cuban social media. It's terrible. You know, you got these right-wing Cubans in Florida that spread lies. You know, like, not just blatant lies, and they promote all kinds of crazy stuff. And there's this thing where, like, when you're looking at right-wing anti-communist Cubans, they have a more fascist type of ideology where, you know, they want to go to Cuba, they want to overthrow communism, but they want to go to Cuba and say, you have to do this, like this. You know, they're not looking for, you know, Cuba to have the power to self-determine. You know, and at this point, the way I see it is if the majority of Cubans support the current government, which I believe is still a true fact, then who are we to tell them otherwise, right? If we're a democratic society, then if we should allow the majority of Cubans to dictate their own government and
I want to
how they
I
choose.
want to stop you there for one reason, because I've said things like that before, but I'm not Cuban. I'm a born Panamanian.
Right,
You are
right,
Cuban. You are
right.
from Cuban descent, so you have the right to make that sort of a statement. So I want to ask you something in that light, because one of the other things that I've said is that we have in Panama a lot of our Panamanian people of color have actually come from Cuba, Jamaica, and all these other places.
Right,
But the
right,
one thing in Cuba is when Batista was in power, uh, people who looked like me, spoke
right,
Spanish, were sweeping floors and dancing and singing. That's it.
right,
If you're lucky to dance and sing, you're a better off somebody who looks like me. But
right,
otherwise, you're sweeping floor and cleaning up other people's crap.
right. And
When
aside, go ahead.
when the Castro regime come in, you can say whatever you want about the Castro regime or whatever.
Right,
People who looked like me became engineers, lawyers, and doctors. Why don't you expand
right.
on that for me?
Well, prior to Castro, what a lot of people tend to overlook is that in Cuba, it was just like in the United States. You couldn't go to certain parks, you couldn't go to certain pools, you weren't allowed in, there were whites only places all over Cuba, in the resort areas, Havana and stuff like that. If you were, black, like you said, you were picking up other people's crap, like, you were sweeping floors and scrubbing toilets, and that's the only work you could get. And for all of Castro's faults, the one thing he got right was civil rights. And yeah, everybody's equally miserable, but that's not totally Castro's fault, and that's not totally, Diaz-Canel's fault. That's the United States fault. We have Donald Trump put, 246 sanctions on Cuba in just 4 years, and there was already, 2, 3, 400 sanctions before that. So you pay penalties for doing business with Cuba. Airbnb just found that out recently. They just got hit with a heavy fine for operating Airbnbs out of Cuba and working with the government to do it, because there's no other way to do it in Cuba. So, I think if, you lift the embargo, all the economic sanctions, you let them operate a free market economy like what Cubans are trying to implement right now, and let them do that, Cuba will be successful and nobody will be able to say anything about it. You may hate the government, you may hate all these things, but you look at Vietnam. Vietnam's a communist government. They installed a free market sort of capitalist type of society, private ownership of land, businesses, things like that, and they're doing fine, and they're still communist. So that's what Cuba wants to do essentially. And
Actually,
if they, what do you say to Cubans when they're happy? Even though it's a communist government.
right. It is amazing, and that is our blind spot, mostly caused by ignorance and not understanding how the world operates, and
Right.
having folks write what you write and explain things the way you explain. I think it's essential. So I thank you for that. Give me a little closer so that we can get out of here.
As far as the closer, and if you want to just support the Antagonist magazine, the antagonistmag.com, and I'm on Medium as well. If you just look up at Extreme Arturo anywhere on social media, I'm pretty much there. So yeah, aside from that, I'm hoping to maybe have a conversation with John Leguizamo. Maybe he sees this, maybe he reads the article that's scheduled to be published at some point today or tomorrow at Latino Rebels. I've tried communicating with him. He liked one of my posts on Instagram that I tagged him in. So maybe that's a step closer to having
That's a step
talk.
closer. Well, look,
Right.
Arturo Dominguez, publisher of Antagonist magazine, leader in woke, among many other areas where he writes. I'll have that all in the correspondent blog. Arturo, first of all, I want to thank you for having turned me on to woke. It's one of the happiest places that I've been in a very long time. I just did an interview a few days ago, and I told them that absent Arturo telling me about you guys, I would have never known about you guys. So I really do appreciate that. Please keep doing the work that you do, because the importance and the depth of writing that you do is unparalleled. So you please keep doing it. There are not a lot of people doing that. And as far as that article, I'm waiting, my brother. Thank you so kindly for having
All
been
right,
on
man.
Politics Done Right.
Thank you, Alberto.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.